We haven't collected that at this point in time on really how many are short-term, how many are long-term, or for that matter, even the housing stock that is available for rental. Staff did a quick windshield survey, drive in the neighborhoods, and there are some neighborhoods where they have 1 to 2 signs up, and I'm not talking for sale now, because there's probably, you go through some blocks, there may be half a dozen homes for sale within 1 block alone, but you'll see that, you know, some of them, they do have for rent signs up. However, the majority of them were actually signs that you would buy from like a Lowe's or a Home Depot just for rent. There were a few commercial signs, and that is important, and I'll get to that a little later into the presentation. In going through the Florida statute, staff worked with fire department, and Florida statute does deal with public lodging establishment. And as you go through this is where you get in now some of the restrictions. But understand, on this statute, the Florida statute is not indicating that we as local government should create ordinances then to restrict within it. But what it says is, if you are renting a place out and you meet these standards in terms of more than 3 times a year for 30 days or less, you're a public establishment. But that public lodging establishment isn't geared towards restricting the use from it, but rather to ensure that you have the adequate fire safeguards within that home. Because now it's gone beyond that threshold of simply somebody coming to visit. You're now renting it out. So in other words, it's very similar to the building code of how you'd pull a permit as a homeowner, as opposed to if in a multifamily commercial, you need a contractor, which means it's no longer your liability. You're putting others at jeopardy, and the state wants to ensure that there's adequate fire protection within that home. Likewise, when we go to our own local code of ordinances, when we get into these types of uses, hotel, motel, the different types, for the most part, they're really talking about within a commercial zoning context. And it's not till we get to the next definition of the code, interval occupancy, and I'm actually going to read this one because I think it's important, because it starts to get a little closer to, I think, what the issue we're trying to address today is. It means a dwelling unit or other accommodation used as a dwelling unit, owned or leased or otherwise held under a timeshare estate for a period of 30 days or less per timeshare estate. The term includes a conversion of existing structures as well as construction of new structures for interval occupancy accommodation, and it shall be considered a residential use. In going through the model short-term restriction, again, I would caution that when staff put that together, that was simply a quick analysis. That wasn't a full ordinance. That was not the direction from council to commit significant time and resource, but rather to identify some of the major areas in which we would want to address as a community, again, to bring it back into, instead of thinking out of the box, to put it into the box so everyone clear on what that ordinance would mean. In going through, staff did identify right off the bat that there are a number of communities, and in our research it was primarily Texas and California, other coastal communities like Venice that have engaged in this type of ordinance. Primarily they deal with, again, in the single family district, they identify a period of time, frequency, as well as, of course, the length of stay. Also, I would recommend that as we go through this, we will need to somehow redefine public lodging, what it means to Venice. Not simply the fire code, but what it means to Venice. And that specifically will get into 2 areas. One, the appropriateness of land uses within a single-family residential zoning district. Because again, if you're looking at creating an ordinance, you're not just going to simply create that ordinance now. You're going to need to go into other sections of your code and see what type of impact it will have on that. If it'll, and into the 4th area. Also taking a look at that, not only, just like you would say if you're establishing a restriction of adult entertainment, you can't just say where it can be put, but then it also forces you to say, well, then where can you do these things? So as you're creating these different thresholds between what we know to be a traditional commercial, a hotel, to something less than that, where we would want to control that, to those existing businesses that are engaged in that. Are you looking at grandfathering them in, or are you looking at creating nonconformities? How does that deal with some of our bed and breakfasts that have been operating for years that are residential uses in residential zoning districts? Third, one of the areas that from staff that we've done a lot of time, head scratching is, of course, the administrative procedures. You're not simply going to adopt an ordinance at this point. Now you have to look at it as staff structure. It'd be very similar to maybe a building or occupational licensing process. It involves permitting, it involves inspections, it involves going through and actually maintaining those public records. It also involves educating staff on where to draw the line. And then, of course, the fourth area that we have to also, I think, ask the question is, are we possibly over-regulating? And I ask that again, not criticizing or making judgment on some of the complaints that have come in from the Golden Beach, but many of the things we've heard about may actually already be protected through either police or code enforcement.